And you can also send a postcard. Again, anybody who sends a postcard to me, the postcard gets scanned and put on the Thelema Coast to Coast website, and in return, I send you a limited edition Thelema Coast to Coast bumper sticker that has the logo. It says Occultism Without Apologies and has the URL. So those are the ways to get in touch with me. To send the postcard, send it to Thelema Coast to Coast, care of John Crow, P.O. Box 7045, Marietta, Georgia, Marietta. Zip code is 30065, and that is in the USA. Okay, so now that I've rambled on for an ungodly amount of time, let's get into the interview. The first one, again, is Richard Kaczynski talking about his book, Panic in Detroit. We have on the phone with us Richard Kaczynski. Welcome back to the podcast, Richard.
Thank you for having me back.
You have just put out the newest version of the Blue Equinox Journal, number 2, called Panic in Detroit, The Magician and the Motor City. And this is a interesting episode in Crowley's life, I guess actually in the life of the OTO, in which Crowley started a body of the OTO in Detroit and then exploded and even got into the newspapers as a huge expose. Can you just give us a quick summary of what this period of time is about and in general the overall aspects of what are covered in this book?
Sure. What happens, and the story starts with Crowley's trip to America, and he winds up meeting, while he's in New York, a bookstore owner who was very interested in esoteric masonry and was interested in helping Crowley put out the next issue of the Equinox, which is volume 3, number 1. And in addition to helping subsidize the printing of this book, he offers to carry Crowley's books that he was trying to sell in his bookstore, and also offers to introduce him to some like-minded esoteric masons in the Detroit area. And the idea here is that Crowley had promoted this idea that he had taken the degrees of the Scottish Rite and these other rituals, under instructions from John Yarker, and boiled them down into the smaller number of degrees of the OTO, and these masons were interested. So from there, they tried to set up the Lakes region of the OTO, essentially to be the U.S. headquarters, and it winds up not working out for a number of reasons, which the book goes into. And Crowley winds up going off to Chafley to found the Abbey of Thelema after the Equinox comes out, but there's ramifications that happen because the publishing company that put out the Blue Equinox winds up going bankrupt, and it goes into bankruptcy courts. And once that happens, this whole involvement of Crowley and the OTO hits the press, which then transforms into this expose of what the press called this, love cult that was in Detroit, and it just becomes front page news for a few days in Detroit. It's a lot of newspapers, but it's and it took up a lot of front page real estate. But it kind of hit and then disappeared, and then came back a few months later and disappeared, and just wouldn't go away. So this documents in transcripts of newspaper articles and reproductions of correspondence with Crowley and Father Akkad, this episode.
So when you say they actually started or tried to found the OTO in the United States, we actually had at one time Crowley, Akkad, we had Smith, and we had C.F. Russell all in the Detroit area working with this group.
Yes.
Not necessarily all at the same time, but in general, trying to get the OTO founded through these people and working in conjunction with the Universal Bookstore.
Yes, in fact, it was amazing because C.S. Jones, or Father Akkad, was living in Detroit for the longest period of time of any of the people you mentioned. He actually worked for the Universal Bookstores in Detroit, and he just got into this really crazy lecture circuit where he was teaching, he was giving classes at the Theosophical Society, he was teaching classes out of his own home, out of the bookstore, just, 4 nights a week, promoting magic and trying to whip up interest in the Equinox and the OTO.
when Crowley started getting these esoteric Masons involved, he was very conscious of their Freemasonic degree, correct?
Very much so. There's some letters where he talks about how Ryerson, who is his book publisher and distributor, is a 32nd degree Mason, and Crowley remarks he's not going to talk to anyone who's less than a 33rd. So he was very, very much aware of the degrees and wanting to get some high-ranking and influential people involved.
Now, how successful was he initially with that?
Well, there were some problems that he ran into, and this revolved around the fact that Freemasons take oaths to Freemasonry, and when they came to look at the OTO and its initiation rituals, they were too close to the Masonic rituals, and there was a conflict of interest there, and these people said they couldn't go ahead and do these rites because they conflicted with their Masonic oaths. And this prompted Crowley to make some revisions to the preliminary degrees of the OTO to make them less Masonic in flavor. And so and these are the revisions that we see echoed in the OTO today. So the changes historically that we've seen in these initiations are due to Crowley trying to get these Detroit Freemasons on board.
Okay, well, let's take a look at what makes this book so special itself. You have your first chapter, which is your explanation, your historical putting together. Then the second section, can you talk about that a little?
Sure. What's in the second section of the book is a collection of about 45, I believe, letters, either to or from Crowley or Jones, dealing with the Detroit period. So it talks about them meeting the Freemasons, trying to get them involved. There's some really funny quotes in there about their perspectives on wanting to be Masons, but at the same time wanting to make sure the Masons understand their place in the big scheme of things. And it's exciting because it was an opportunity for me to put out a bunch of letters that had never been published before. So this is, again, some really great source material. And not only do these letters talk about getting the OTO going in Detroit, but it covers a lot of other interesting things in the course of the correspondence as well. Crowley's talking about trying to publish the second issue and the third issue of the Equinox, and that is part of this correspondence, and just various other things that are just a really interesting piece of where the OTO is at this point in time.
And the subsequent sections after, what did you include there?
Well, let's see, in the subsequent sections there is a reproduction of the prospectus for the Equinox. There is also a collection of transcripts of these newspaper articles, what Ryerson called the mess in the press, so that were newspaper headlines talking about, OTO, trouble laid to OTO cults, and OTO book leads to wrecked homes and things like that. So you get to see how very, very quickly this expose in the newspaper goes from, there's this weird cult in Detroit, to, wait a minute, they put out this book, this book is obscene, this obscene book may have been sent through the mail, now we're bringing in federal prosecutors, let's impound the whole bunch of books and determine whether they're obscene. It just gets crazier from there when Hollywood director William Desmond Taylor turns up mysteriously murdered in his home. The fact that he had a copy of White Stains suddenly becomes an OTO connection, and the newspapers started putting out this theory that the OTO was behind the death of William Desmond Taylor, and just crazy, crazy stuff. But this was all, again, front page news in Detroit at the time it happened.
Ryerson actually, because of all of this, ended up going bankrupt and divorced?
Yes. He actually wound up getting divorced shortly after he met Crowley, and the divorce complaint is actually quite funny because his wife, when she filed for divorce, complained that he feels that he's no longer bound to abide by the laws of convention or the society, but to conduct himself in the manner that is consistent with the dictates of his own conscience and will. And, as Thelemites would find nothing at all shocking or scandalous about that statement, but it was grounds for divorce in 1918. So, Ryerson, meets Crowley, becomes a Thelemite, gets divorced, and publishes the Equinox, and it wound up not selling as much as, they expected it would. There seems to be much more going on with this story than the Equinox, however, because when the Universal Bookstores went into bankruptcy, the board of directors claimed that they were, that Ryerson had spent like $35,000 publishing the Equinox, and it was nowhere near that amount. So there were bigger financial issues going on, so it's not entirely fair to say that the Equinox or the Crowley bankrupted the company. There was more going on, but things just went from bad to worse in this situation.
And it was pretty smart of Akkad and Smith to get out of Detroit before everything blew up.
Yeah, and there's an interesting piece of that story too, which is that before they left town, they had left a bunch of Crowley rare books in a warehouse somewhere that they completely forgotten about. They didn't even know where it was. And these books sat in the warehouse until 1954, when this crate of books was opened up and people had no idea what it was. So, and that collection, for the most part, wound up down at the University of Texas in Austin. But, it's just these interesting little stories about that come out of that whole Detroit period.
Well, I would love to go on more about this, but we have limited time, so instead, let's recommend everybody go to the Blue Equinox website. What is the URL?
It is www.blueequinox.org.
Okay, and then they can go into the shopping cart area and purchase this, and it's $20 plus shipping.
Correct, and all proceeds from the book do go back to the Blue Equinox Oasis and to promote its nonprofit goals.
Well, if this is issue number 2, is there an issue number 3 somewhere in the future?
Yes, absolutely, and no plans on what that issue will be. I've got several ideas in mind. It's just a matter of which one bubbles to the top first.
Now, number 2 and number 1 were kind of outtakes from your previous biography, I guess. And that's why number 3 is going to be something completely new?
Yes, I really like the idea of putting out original source material for people to be able to have just reference stuff in their libraries. I think it's also important to use this as a vehicle for putting out some original work as well. And I've got a number of things I'm working on, ranging from the Chaldean oracles to Enochian magic, to the Gnostic Mass, that I don't think have a big enough audience for a mainstream publisher, but through a limited press run like the Blue Equinox Journal, would find enough interested people.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again for being on the podcast, and when the next issue comes out, let us know, and we'll have you back.
Will do. Thank you for having me on the show again.
93.
Again, I want to thank Dr. Kaczynski for being on the podcast. I really appreciate him taking the time and talking about these historical aspects. I think it's very, very important for Thelemites to know the history of Thelema and what Crowley was doing during his lifetime to try to manifest Thelema. So thank you, Dr. Kaczynski. And also on the Thelema Coast to Coast website and in the show notes, I have a link directly to the website where you can buy that book. Again, it's $20 plus shipping. Okay, so now we're going to move forward to the interview with Keith Richmond of Weiser Antiquarian, where we talk about Ray Burlingame and the books that he has for sale through them.
We have on the podcast Keith Richmond from Weiser Antiquarian Books. Welcome to the podcast, Keith, 93.
Hello, John, 93.
Recently, you and a partner purchased Weiser Antiquarian. Can you tell the listeners where you all want to take Weiser Antiquarian?
Basically, we've only taken the business over a couple of months ago. My partner, Marilyn, is the long-term manager of Weiser Antiquarian, and I suppose we don't have any dramatic